it's Miss Strapshow, and we're in the library corner. And today I have an author. Our author is Dr. Jean Snyder, and she taught at Edinburgh University for a very long time. But most importantly, she wrote a book which took her many years, and we're going to talk about that, on Harry Burley. And Harry T. Burley is an Erie native. We are at Pifer Burley School, half of which is named after Mr. Burley, and he was a Negro spiritualist. He wrote songs, actually he wrote songs about love, and he wrote Negro spirituals. We're going to talk to Dr. Snyder about that. So how long did it take you to write your book?
Well, the actual writing of the biography took me from 2000 to 2015, the end of 2015. It was actually published in 2016. I started working on Burley long before that. When I first came to Pittsburgh to do my doctoral work, I did a couple of seminar papers on Burley and got hooked. So if you start with my first paper, I wrote that in 1984, but I had no idea I was going to do anything more than that.
Wow.
At that time, I had no idea, but I got hooked. So, you know how libraries are. They're my favorite places.
And we like to hear that. So why did you, I know that you wrote a paper in 1984 and you were hooked, but what hooked you? What was it about Harry Burley? Did your teacher assign you that name, or did you get to choose?
Well, I taught in Kenya and in Zambia. I taught 3 years in Kenya, and the last year that I was in Kenya, I lived in Nairobi, and I sang in a choir at the Nairobi Baptist Church with a wonderful contralto named Catherine Mbathi. She was born in the States. She went to Kenya in the 50s to teach, and she married a Kenyan and became a Kenyan citizen. So years passed. It happened that my brother and his wife had the first grandchild in our family in Zambia in 1977, and I took my mother to meet her first grandchild in Zambia.
Wow.
And I said to my friend Catherine, because we were going to go through Kenya, what shall I bring you? And she said, well, I need some spirituals. I don't care what they are, just so they're arranged by H.T. Burley. And I thought, who's H.T. Burley? I'm a singer. I should know who this is. I didn't realize that I have been listening to arrangements of spirituals by Burley for years in recordings by Paul Robeson, Marian Anderson. I just didn't pay attention who arranged them. Because Burley didn't write the spirituals, he arranged them because they were written by the slave, they were created by the slaves.
Okay.
Burley then arranged them so anybody could sing them, even though they didn't grow up in that, in that culture.
Okay.
And that was important to him. He wanted to make it possible for anybody to sing those songs. And
wow. So did Harry Burley only do spirituals, and what are some of the titles of the spirituals that we might know?
Go Down Moses, Deep River, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child.
Oh.
You want me to go on?
Nobody knows.
That's it. You got it.
I've
right.
heard that a lot on in jail.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yes. Okay.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, there are hundreds of them. Burley arranged about over 100 of them, but many. As soon as he started doing it, everybody followed. Black composers and white composers immediately started doing it. So now there are hundreds and hundreds of arrangements of spirituals, and the ones that are being written today are very different from the ones that Burley wrote. But he helped it happen, because those spirituals were about to disappear. And he understood.
Why were they disappearing?
Because slavery was such a difficult time. And after slavery ended, after people were released from slavery, they wanted to be educated. They wanted to move upward. They didn't want to be reminded of slavery. So Burley was from a family that was unusual in that even though they were well educated, his mother was very well educated, they believed these were really valuable songs and important. And Burley, in fact, when he studied at the National Conservatory of Music in New York City, he studied with Antonin Dvorak, who was from Czechoslovakia. But he loved hearing Burley sing these songs. And he said, give those melodies to the world.
So Dvorak, the composer.
That's a composer. And
very
so he
interesting.
helped Burley understand that he needed to make these available to all of us.
Now, you said Burley also did love songs?
Yes, he wrote his first songs that were published. The first ones were published in 1898. They were love songs. And some of the songs that he wrote over 100 of these art songs, they were called, songs for a trained singer accompanied by piano. And some of them were written, some of the lyrics, some of the words were written by African American poets, but they weren't about, they were about love or nature or, the things that poets write about.
Yeah.
There were only 2 songs of his art songs that really reflect his being an African American. One is a setting of a poem by Walt Whitman called Ethiopia Saluting the Colors. It's about a soldier in the Union Army who meets a 100-year-old slave woman, and she tells her story, and it changes him. And then Burley's next to the last art song is a setting of a poem by Langston Hughes, Lovely, Dark, and Lonely One, Bare Your Bosom to the Golden Sun. That's a wonderful song. In fact, I was just at a conference and I had a wonderful tenor sing that song.
How beautiful. It sounds so beautiful. I want to ask you about the actual writing of the book. So, I know that we read fiction books all the time,
Right.
and this is nonfiction.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
the story it's a biography,
Right.
the story of someone's life.
Right.
And where did you get your information? Did you just Google Harry?
There wasn't
Burley?
Google. Google didn't exist when I started.
So if Google didn't exist, how could you possibly?
Well, libraries are my favorite places. I came up here lots of times. I spent a lot of time in the library and the Historical Society here. In fact, the old public library, which was on Perry Square, they had some things. They had copies of some of his songs. I went through the Erie city directories. You can find all kinds of information going through these old books about where people lived and what they did, what their jobs were, and so on. So the funny thing is, there was a man in Edinburgh who was known as a Burley expert. And one of the times I came up here, I called him, and he said, "Oh, there's nothing in Erie." And I thought, you just keep thinking that. I know better. I'm going to find. You just keep being ignorant about it.
Yeah.
Because there's so much, but you have to know how to look.
So if I were a young person going to the library to look up information on Erie history, which section of the Erie County Public Library, specifically Blasco, because we're in the city, where would I go?
You would go to the second floor, go up the stairs or up the elevator, go into the Heritage Room.
In the Heritage Room.
They have old histories of Erie and Erie County. They have microfilms of newspapers. I spent many hours going through microfilms of newspapers because I discovered that the Erie Morning Dispatch often reported on Burley singing when he was a teenager.
Why was that? Do you know?
Because
Do
he
you have
had a
an idea?
beautiful voice.
Oh,
He sang in the men and boys choir at the St. Paul's Episcopal Church, but he was singing all over town. He was a paid singer at the First Presbyterian Church, at the Hebrew Synagogue. In fact, the director of the Fisk Jubilee Singers tried to recruit him to tour with them, and Burley was in Cleveland on his way to Ravenna, Ohio, to join this very famous Jubilee troupe. They sent a telegram and said, "Please decline that flattering offer," and they raised his salary. So he would come back to Erie, and he did. He came back to Erie.
they were fighting over him.
They were fighting over him because he had such a wonderful voice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get some questions as people will say, did Harry Burley really go to Piper Burley School?
I don't think Piper Burley School existed. Actually, St. James existed, but it wasn't on 11th Street during Burley's time. It was on 6th Street and 7th Street and other places in the city.
I see.
But there was, from 1874 on, there was St. James. And the family, even though Burley and his mother went to St. Paul's on Sunday mornings, the family their social life centered at St. James. And
I
so whenever something is mentioned about St. James, usually one of the Burley's family shows up in those stories.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So they were a spiritual family, and from Erie, and from Erie he went to the New York City Conservatory for music, and then sort of what happened. He, I there was something very interesting that you said to me, and I was, or when you were talking to the students, and I thought that's very interesting. That he was very popular, and he must have made a good salary for the time.
Actually, there were several ways that he made a living. When he was studying, he had a tuition scholarship, so he didn't have to pay tuition, but he had to pay his life, for his place to live and to eat and so on. He washed dishes. He did all kinds of jobs. But in 1894, which was 2 years after he went to New York City, he was hired as the baritone soloist at St. George's Episcopal Church, which was near the conservatory. So he had a job. In fact, he was one of 60 singers that competed for that job.
Oh my goodness!
But they did the audition behind a screen so that the committee couldn't see that he was a black man.
Really, it's like a modern or an ancient day voice.
Exactly. You're right. The part of the story that's interesting is that when they saw this young black man that they wanted to change their minds, and the rector said, "No, this is the voice that you chose. This is our singer." And J.P. Morgan, who was a very wealthy man, said, "That's my man."
Great.
And
I'm so glad to
he
hear
used
that.
to sing at J.P. Morgan's home at Christmas time. And when Morgan died, Burley sang at his funeral because Morgan wanted him to. So
Very
he made
interesting.
lots of friends. But then after he was at St. George's, that was his job for over 50 years. But he also got paid for singing, and he got paid a lot in some of those wealthy homes. I found a telegram. They were going to pay him $300. Now this is in 1903. That is a whale of a lot of money.
Right.
He did that. He sang for wealthy families. He also sang for people that weren't wealthy. He would often do benefit concerts to raise money for orphanages and
Really?
that sort of thing. But he also had students. He studied voice with him, so he got paid for that. And then when he started writing songs, then he got some money from the sale of his music. And this is interesting. In 1914, the ASCAP, that is the American, Society for Singers, Composers, and Authors, Publishers, I'm not getting it quite right, but that was formed so that people who wrote and published music and books would get money, royalties from it, and so that helped him earn money.
Very interesting.
So, yeah.
Very interesting.
And now
So-
his family is still getting royalties from the sale of his music.
Really?
Yeah.
So Harry T. Burley lives on through music, but is his family, are they in New York City?
No, they're
in
not.
Erie?
Actually, his grandson, Harry T. Burley II, when I started doing my work, he was a veterinarian in Clarksburg, West Virginia, which is just 2 hours south of Pittsburgh. So when I finally got up my courage to write to him, it's crazy because I got this phone call at 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, and this voice said, "This is Harry Burley." And Dr. Harry Burley. And he said, because I had sent him a letter and I wanted to come down and interview him. And he said, "No, don't come to Clarksburg. I won't write anything, but I'll answer any questions you have. We'll come to Pittsburgh and we'll bring you things." And they did. They brought me wonderful things that none of the other people that wanted to write about him had seen. So the family papers were really helpful. They had letters, they had stories, they had programs from when he gave recitals, things that he had kept, So the book couldn't have happened. I mean, that's why I dedicated it to the Burley family and his niece, Grace Blackwell, who's still living she's 95. She lives in East Orange, New Jersey.
Wow.
She has Alzheimer's now, and so But I knew her when she told me wonderful stories about, because she was very close to him in the last years of his life. She had great stories about her Uncle Harry.
Oh my goodness, how wonderful. So Harry Burley, he died in New York City?
In 1949, yeah.
Very interesting. And so his music lives on today.
That's right.
And his family, I think you said there was a Harry T. Burley the third?
Yes.
The third?
His great-grandson is Harry T. Burley III, and he lives near Washington, D.C.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for
My
writing
pleasure.
this book.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for, we're going to put this in our libraries, and I think it's going to be one of the most valuable assets that we have.
Oh, thank you.
We truly have been lacking in information on Harry Burley.
Okay, well, I wrote that book so that people who aren't musicians would enjoy it. So I want it to be, it's such a great story, and I want everybody to read it, not just people that are, musicians.
Yes,
so,
yes, I
So
agree.
there's all the documentation for the scholars, but it's a story.
It is
It's a wonderful
It is.
story.
It's a great story. So thank you.
So-
Thank you so much for bringing that to the kids today.
Thank you.
Your presentation was wonderful.
I had a ball.
So thank you.
They were so
thoroughly
responsive, and they
enjoyed it.
asked good questions. So
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
So thank you. So thank you very much,
Thank you.
everyone. We'll see you right back here at the library corner.